I wanted to empower the reader in the real world to notice misinformation and to combat it.
This is Alex Edmans, finance professor with an incredibly impressive background in business, academia, and policy. I'm interviewing him as he's the author of many content lies. He's an expert in the use and misuse of data and evidence.
The recognition that we now live in a post-truth world has led to a much-needed emphasis on checking the facts.
Post-truth comes from his very popular TED Talk, and is a better way of saying that we live in a world full of conspiracies, sectarianism, and bullshit.
Just checking the facts is not enough.
That's an acute challenge in life, but even more in investing because it's never tangible. Enjoy one of the most important conversations we've had on this podcast.
Post-truth world is one where we're guided by what we want to be true, irrespective of whether it's actually true. So let's take the topic of investing, given the podcast. And so one might be, perhaps controversially, the view that ESG always leads to higher returns. So I'm somebody who believes in ESG. I'm a strong sustainability advocate. My first book, Grow the Pie, was on the power of sustainability. However, there are many studies which claim that sustainability pays off where the actual evidence is very weak. They fail control for risk, they fail to control for industry. But if we want it to be true, we lap it up uncritically. We share these articles on LinkedIn. Other people like them because they want them to be true without actually looking. Is the data as rigorous as the conclusions are claiming?
The TED Talk was from 2018, and I feel like we've gone deeper in that post-truth world. We're not just guided by what we want to be true. Even if it's proven wrong, it's totally fine.
Yeah, we may have it actually evolved, but actually evolved in the wrong direction, sadly, because evolution often implies getting better. So I think in 2018, this post-truth idea was, okay, there's lots of post-truths being spread. Let's make sure we get back to the truth. So there's the recognition that there's some lies and misleading statements. Let's try to combat them. But nowadays, we've got to the point that sometimes it doesn't even matter if a statement is misleading, even if it's found out. So again, let's take some claims that sustainability leads to superior financial performance. And there's loads of these studies, often done by consultancies, which are claiming this. When they're exposed and when people say, well, actually, the evidence is not that strong, then people say, well, the truth doesn't even matter. Sustainability is good for the world. So you are being narrow-minded by focusing on the profitability outcome and saying, well, the evidence is not that strong. But this is just being a chameleon, because you can't first start by claiming that sustainability is based on a financial case, and then when this is contradicted by saying, well, all along I was going to be using a social and moral case. And so you might concede that. And then you could say, well, there's other advantages of sustainability. That's absolutely fine. But just to say, well, the objections that you raised are illegitimate because financial outcomes don't matter, well, you yourself were parading the supposed financial benefits of sustainability to begin with.
Where the book may contain lines, the whole approach of Alex is groundbreaking and useful, is that he doesn't look for a solution in regulation or social media moderation or something that comes from above.
So if you want to combat misinformation, know your enemy. So what leads us to fall for misinformation? You might blame other people. You might say, oh, it's all these social media companies and people out there who are causing misinformation. I notice that often people share misinformation. They genuinely think it is true. So why is it indeed that maybe people say, well, this is a superfood? They might genuinely think there are health benefits of this and they want to share this with other people. So instead, I want to turn the attention not to blaming others, but to ourselves being more discerning and asking, well, what is causing us to believe something like this superfood is going to be improving health, or this ESG rating is always correlated with better financial performance? And once we recognize we have our own biases, so to me, it is my bias towards thinking that sustainability is good, that then I want to be particularly discerning about a sustainability study, because I might be willing to lap it up just because it confirms what I want to be true.
And what I love about that is that it's super empowering. The solution is within ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. So we often think misinformation is somebody else's problem to solve. The government should regulate it. social media companies should stop spreading misinformation, but they do have responsibility. I think it's just unrealistic to rely on them. So for the government, yes, it might be able to prosecute people who spread misinformation, but misinformation is spread far faster than it can be prosecuted. And similarly for social media, I don't think they have the incentives to stamp out misinformation. Social media's incentives are to keep your eyes on the app, be it Instagram or LinkedIn or X, and they keep your eyes on it by sharing the information that you want to be true. So they will show you posts from other people in your echo chamber. So even though in an ideal world, other people would solve this information, we don't live in an ideal world. We live in the real world. And I wanted to empower the reader in the real world to notice misinformation and to combat it. Now, you might think, well, it's asking too much of the reader for the reader to be discerning. You might not have a PhD in statistics. Well, I don't have a PhD in statistics either. There is not a single equation in the entire book. What I'm trying to show you is that you already have the skills for discernment within you already, and I'm just trying to show you a couple of simple questions you can ask yourself to make sure that you are able to spot misinformation without having to do statistical pyrotechnics.
The book takes example across many industries. But that's somehow reassuring because I thought the overload of marketing hype and narrative was just an investing problem. But I also wanted to get Alex's view on the specificity of the investment world.
Well, I think in the investing industry, you have many people wanting to believe they found the next predictor of returns. And again, why do people do this? It's not that they're bad people willfully spreading misinformation. They want to be helpful. If they find a factor or characteristic which is linked to future returns, they do want to share it. But I think the question is this really a strong result? So is this something where the sample size is small, so you could have got lucky? Have you controlled for other factors? Because if not, then it could be other factors which are driving the returns. Other factors could be driving those returns. And it could also be that there's problems with the statistics or the methodology. And so what do you do if you find a study that you don't like? So what do you do if you find a study that you do like? One tip is to imagine that it found the opposite result, one that you don't like. For me, let's say it found that sustainability worsens financial performance. Think about how you'd attack it. I might say, well, the sample size is too short. What was their actual measure of sustainability? Is it a legitimate measure? Have they controlled for other factors?
Now, this approach is really powerful, practical, because it's not about doing some deep research in a topic. I mean, that's not a bad idea, but I've seen, for example, for the work I've done with private equity, is that it's so complex that you can't always check the data if it's not your full-time work, or you can't debunk the whole marketing. In fact, if you do superficial web browsing, you might just go deeper into the dominant narrative. But this path to rationality makes me wonder, what do we do about the narratives? Because they're important. And as Schiller, the Nobel Prize winner, demonstrated, whether they're true or not, they still move the market. We still have to live with them.
So I think stories can be useful if used in combination with large-scale data. So what I don't like and what I highlight the dangers of in the book is just some claims made based purely on stories and anecdotes. So books like Start With Why by Simon Sinek or Malcolm Gladwell's work, they take a story, tell it really, really well, and this makes people believe in that story, even though it could be one isolated case. It could be the exception that does not prove the rule. So what we need is large-scale evidence. So these might be multivariate regressions. But a multivariate regression is never going to excite anybody. It's not memorable. So you want the combination of regressions and stories. And so this is what I try to do in the book in order to illustrate my points. I might give one particular salient story of misinformation, and then I give a large-scale evidence showing that this is the bias in action.
And that's where, again, I feel like Alex's model is really, really super powerful, because it doesn't leave us in a purely cold and rational world. It allows us to live with narratives, build stories, use them for marketing. And he's also a great storyteller himself. His book about critical thinking is full of anecdotes. He's a great speaker. He's excellent He's amazing on social media.
I think this is a really important skill, and I think this is a skill which is sometimes underappreciated by academics who think, oh, what we need is the scientific purity of my regression analysis. But people don't always make decisions based on regression analyses. They are people, and we have grown up with an oral tradition. This is how information was passed on thousands of years ago. So I think we need to recognize humanity, and we need to recognize that people are much more receptive to stories. But then we need to realize, well, this is the danger, is that we can persuade with stories even if those stories are not that true. And you might think, well, why do I care? As long as I've persuaded somebody, but you will lose reputation if the story that you are using to make a conclusion is not backed up by large-scale data. So I think the error of academics is not putting enough weight on stories, but then the danger of other sort of would-be authors is putting too much weight on stories and not enough on evidence. So just like many other things, we don't want to view the world in black and white terms. We want to have the combination of both stories and statistics.
So as I try to figure out a way to combine the need for rationality and storytelling in the way I create and consume content, I think that layers could be the right approach. There's the attention layer with the titles, thumbnails, and stories that we may or may not decide to click on or to follow, but it must give way to a more in-depth layer where we apply critical thinking, and that's how we make better investment decisions.
The lesson of the book is not you need to get a PhD in statistics in order to combat misinformation, but we already have discernment within ourselves. So whenever I see a article posted on LinkedIn that people don't like the sounds of, there's no shortage of comments as to why correlation is not causation, or maybe the time series was too small. But then do we see the same concerns when there is a study posted that people do like the sound of? No, people lap it up uncritically. So what I'm trying to encourage you to do is to show the same discernment to something you do like as something that you don't. And notice I say discernment, I don't say cynicism or being a conspiracy theorist, but I think it's useful to have a healthy dose of discernment in what we see.
And this is where, even if the book wasn't about investing, the message of the book is a key to something that I'm obsessed with over years, this whole concept of democratization of investing that worries me. We have access to more products, and we're bombarded with more marketing, and we cannot all be masters in finance. But knowing our own biases, that what we read may contain lies, even if it's research and so on, that provides us with the tools to discern the hype and the reality and serve as a very practical guide.
Yeah, so I'm glad to hear this. This is supposed to be a practical guide. So I am an academic, but I really enjoy applying academic insights to real world problems, and so investing is an absolutely one big application. I'm sorry that the book is not full of investing examples. That is within my absolute strike zone because a lot of my engagement is with asset managers, but Penguin wanted it to appeal to everybody, so even non-finance people. So that's why there's going to be lots of examples on, say, diet and health advice and bringing up children. So hopefully those, while they're not investing examples, they're still relevant examples for any of your audience.
I think the work of Alex Edmans and its lessons are very important. I really recommend the book, but I also want to mention a framework that he offers, which is the inference ladder. A statement is not a fact, it may not be accurate. A fact is not data, it may not be represented. Data is not evidence, it may not be conclusive. Evidence is not proof, it may not be universal. Since I read that book, I look at news, research, and so on very differently. And the best part of it is that it goes beyond investing. Thinking critically is actually a life skill with many, many practical benefits. I've also posted separately the whole conversation with Alex Edmans, as well as a part where we discuss ESG, impact investing, which also has some groundbreaking answers. Thank you very much.